Hello and welcome to Global Business, coming to you live from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. We begin, as always, with a look at the market. South African stocks traded weaker today as the central bank left its main interest rate on hold as expected. The South African Reserve Bank kept the repo rate at 6.5% in a unanimous decision in line with market expectations. We'll be discussing that in just a bit. The broader all-share index was down 0.06% to 56,184.13 points, while the benchmark top 40 index fell 0.11% to 50,078 points. Coming up on the show tonight. Ethiopia rejects Egypt's proposal on operating $4 billion hydropower dam. UN projects intra-Africa trade to grow by 60% in 2020. And trade talks between China and the US set to resume in Washington. Ethiopia has rejected a proposal to Egypt to operate a $4 billion hydropower dam that Ethiopia is constructing on the Nile. This has further deepened a dispute between the two nations over the project. Ethiopia's Minister for Water, Irrigation and Energy, Sileshi Bekele, described Egypt's plan, including the volume of water it wants the dam to release annually, as inappropriate. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, announced in 2011, is designed to be the centerpiece of Ethiopia's bid to become Africa's biggest power exporter, generating more than 6,000 megawatts. The two nations disagree over the annual flow of water that should be guaranteed to Egypt and how to manage flows during droughts. Yasser Hakim is keeping tabs on this story for us. He joins us live now from Cairo. So Yasser, Cairo wants Ethiopia to release a minimum of 40 billion cubic meters of water from the dam annually, but that is just one of several other disagreements between these two countries. What else are they not agreeing on?
Yes, there are several disagreements. I'll just go through three of them. They're considered the main ones, apart from other issues. First of all, obviously, is the period to fill the dam. The reservoir of the dam. Ethiopia says it wants to fill the dam in 2 or 3 years. Egypt says 5 to 7 years, according to the drought and the water. Obviously, this is one of the main differences between them. Ethiopia wants the dam to be filled quickly so that it can operate the turbines to charge electricity as soon as possible, 12 turbines. They will take years, and that's why it wants to finish the filling quickly. Egypt fears that a quick filling of the dam would mean that it will it will cut from Egypt's water share of the Nile every year. And obviously Egypt is already suffering from water poverty, and the Nile water is the source of water for Egypt. Drinking water, 95% of Egypt's drinking water comes from the Nile, and that's why it is considered an important aspect that Egypt is not willing to discuss too much or to give up on this, that the water share would not be reduced. A second point is operating the hydroelectric part of the dam, and Ethiopia wants to work on this as soon as possible. It has to be done also in coordination with the high dam and the dams in Sudan. If Ethiopia wants it to be operating unilaterally without coordination with the high dam, this could lead to lower water levels at the Aswan high dam, which will mean it will affect the production of electricity in Egypt, or electricity production in Egypt, which comes from the high dam. So that's another effect, that's another issue that they're both discussing, how to coordinate the hydroelectric operation of the Renaissance Dam with the high dam and Sudan dams. Ethiopia wants to do it unilaterally without having to depend and to wait for the Aswan Dam water levels there. Obviously also to help in their electricity production. So those are from the main issues that the sides are working on and trying to find a way to unanimously agree on in the next few weeks.
So over the years, Yasser, there's been negotiations between Egypt and Ethiopia to find common ground on the construction of this Grand Renaissance Dam. Why has there been no consensus up until now?
Each side feels that they have the importance or the freedom to take the decision. Each side sees that this dam is important. Ethiopia sees the dam as extremely important for production, electricity production, for development, economic development, and obviously industries and so forth. Egypt sees the dam, it could harm its own interests and basically water, which is something that is about life and death for Egyptians, because there is no other source of water for Egypt. At the moment, there are some desalination projects and so forth, but they only cover 5% of Egypt's sources of water. And that's why each side is taking a firm stance concerning their points of view, and that Egypt has also tried to convince the Ethiopian side to bring in mediators and third parties or fourth parties. Sudan is also with them in the talks, but fourth parties, to technical experts to give their own opinion as well, or to interfere or to bring international organizations such as the UN and so forth to mediate. But this has been rejected from the other side. So, and that's why there is stalemate, and they're trying to again meet end of the month, to end of September, to try to iron out any differences and find any kind of solutions for these issues before. Egypt wants to find a solution before the construction of the dam is over.
And speaking of Yasser, Ethiopia now says the dam will start power production by the end of 2020. So is there hope all issues will be resolved by then?
If you look at the way the last few years the talks have been going on, obviously it's not optimistic. It doesn't give an optimistic view of finding a solution. Both sides have been at odds with the same points over the last few years, although they have both signed an agreement to try to solve the differences together. But with 1 or 1.5 years remaining, so far, there's nothing to show that there is a breakthrough. Even comments coming and statements coming from the Egyptian side shows that they are not at ease, that they are frustration. There's frustration from the Egyptian side that the slow process of the talks, and that Ethiopia has taken a long time to sit and talk. Even there has not been a meeting for months, and Egypt has been trying to push through meetings as soon as possible. Like I said, Egypt wants to end this deadlock before the dam is in operation, while for Ethiopia it seems that it's not a matter of urgency. And this brings sort of a kind of insecurity from the Egyptian side concerning the way Ethiopia is looking or is tackling this file. So, so far there's nothing to show optimism that this issue can be solved at any moment.
All right, Yasser, thank you for that update. Yasser came live in Cairo. Now, Somalia's economy is expected to grow by 2.9% this year from 2.8% last year. According to the International Monetary Fund, inflation is projected to increase temporarily to 4% this year. The fund has blamed this on higher food prices as a result of poor rainfall early in the year. In May, the IMF had put Somalia's economic growth forecast at 3% and inflation projections at 3 to 3.2%. Over the past decade, Somalia has been hit by famine and sporadic terror attacks by Al-Qaeda-linked militant group Al-Shabaab. The fund has been pushing for better management of public finances, while the government is implementing reforms and an agreed staff-monitored program. In South Africa, the Reserve Bank has decided to keep the interest rate steady at 6.5% in line with market expectations. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee made the decision against the backdrop of looser monetary policy globally, with the US Federal Reserve announcing a 25 basis point cut on Wednesday evening. The Fed's decision was not unanimous, however, and economists have noted that it appears fairly divided on the appropriate path for future interest rates. The South African bank revised its inflation forecast for 2019 down slightly to 4.2% from 4.4%. However, projections for 2020 remain unchanged at 5.1%, with a small revision up for 2021 to 4.7% from 4.6%.
The MPC assesses the risks to the growth forecast to be balanced in the near term, but remains concerned about medium-term growth and weak employment prospects. Escalation in global trade tensions, further domestic supply constraints, and/or sustained higher oil prices could generate headwinds to growth. Public sector financing needs remain high, exerting pressure on the currency and pushing local bond yields higher relative to country peers. Implementation of prudent macroeconomic policies and structural reforms that lower costs and raise investment and potential growth remains urgent.
Let's get more from Sumitra Naidu, live for us in Johannesburg, South Africa. Sumitra, the MPC kept the rates unchanged. What informed this decision? Why didn't they go for a rate cut, for instance?
So, you know, Peninah, what's really interesting, most economists, when you ask them what they expected from the Reserve Bank, they said that they were expecting no change in this decision, and it was no surprise, today's decision. But if you had to ask economists what they would have wanted the Reserve Bank to do, many of them would say they wanted the Reserve Bank to cut rates. But it's almost as if they can read the Reserve Bank, and the Reserve Bank always remains conservative and remains cautious. So, you know, even though inflation remains in check and is expected to continue moderating in the next few months, the Reserve Bank felt it was still uncomfortable with a cut at this stage. And this is because there's just too many uncertainties, issues outside of the domestic economy that could also have an impact on the rand going forward, which could in turn change the inflation outlook. So the governor spoke about higher wages and electricity prices on the domestic front. We saw in the latest consumer price index inflation ticking up slightly, but worrying in the breakdown of those numbers was a sharp rise in food inflation. A rise in fuel prices pushed up prices, and of course, you know, when you look outside of the country, the tensions rising in the Middle East with Saudi Arabia and Iran, oil prices could take a volatile turn, you know, in the coming months. That raised a bit of concern for them. The tensions between China and the United States, quantitative easing in the US, also Brexit. All of these were just too many concerns, and the bank felt that, you know, at this stage there was not going to be a change in the repo rate. Peninah.
Oh, okay, so the bank revised its inflation forecast for 2019 downwards ever so slightly by 0.2%. But the country is still grappling with a weak economy, low growth, rising unemployment. How is government tackling all these?
Yes, so that's right. So again, the governor called for urgent action on structural reforms. He has been very vocal on this issue for some time now. At previous meetings, he said, you know, that he was very concerned. Government needed to take action. And today he did say that he was encouraged to see the government making a move in the right direction. You know, previously he was very clear about the fact that monetary policy relief isn't the answer to fixing the economy. He said government needed to do more to address unemployment. And, you know, there's been promises from the president and some of his ministers on cutting back on the red tape to make the environment more conducive, especially for small business. Work is continuing with the Yes campaign to get more young people into paid internships. So there has been movement, but again, the Reserve Bank governor was at pains to say that there's urgent action needed in terms of these structural reforms, especially to get employment going, and monetary policy is not the answer to fixing this economy. It isn't going to provide the relief that everyone's talking about, and it's not going to provide the boost that this economy needs. It really needs to come from government.
Okay, and the governor also said investors remain concerned about domestic growth prospects and fiscal risks. And of course, this comes on the back of the xenophobic attacks we witnessed recently. What strategies is the government using to attract investors?
Well, you know, after the press conference today, the governor was very clear in saying that you know, these structural reforms and these plans to attract investors are going to be done by the guys down the road, you know, obviously talking about government. So the finance minister has released a new plan to fast track an economic recovery and growth. The plan calls for modernization of network industries such as energy, transport and telecommunications to make them more competitive. The plan also suggests that Eskom, which has been a massive drain on the fiscus because of its poor balance sheet, should actually consider selling off some of its coal-fired power stations. Eskom's debt is sitting in the region of more than $40 billion. So there's still question marks around Eskom and the other big state-owned entities that are still financially dependent on the government. SABC and SAA are both looking for money again. So not sure how this is going to sit with investors going forward if government again gives into these loans and bailouts for these state-owned entities. This is a huge problem, and you know, these problems are not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And we've also heard from the rating agencies warnings about how much money is going to Eskom in particular, and what they're going to do about it. So, you know, there's still question marks around that. But there's also plans to fast-track the auctioning of spectrum to open up and improve competitiveness in the ICT sector to ensure the speedy rollout of broadband to you know, underserved areas and lower data prices. That has been a contentious issue. The plan also focuses on the agricultural sector, in which government has to, you know, implement policies to help unlock inclusive, labor-intensive economic growth, better agricultural insurance, making land tenure rights secure, and enabling easy access to finance and export markets. So there's quite a few plans in place, but they've just been announced. Implementation has not been a strong point in South Africa. And, you know, with the xenophobic attacks, there's going to be a lot more work to be done with the rest of the region in terms of restoring good relations. So there's, you know, so right now it's all talk. A lot of this needs to be implemented. A lot more needs to be done. It really depends on how all of these plans are going to be implemented going forward and what that's going to mean for investors and whether they're going to come back, because foreign direct investment has been waning in recent years. Peninah.
All right, Sumitra, thank you very much for that. Sumitra Naidu live for us in Johannesburg. All right, so coming up next, a look at your corporate headlines. The Kenya Power and Lighting Company Limited has projected a decline of its net earnings by more than 25%. The drop in profits is partly due to an increase in non-fuel costs in line with the firm's long-term strategy of growing cheaper and cleaner renewable energy. South Africa's Blue Label Telecoms, which is the largest shareholder of Cell C, has recorded a 45% headline loss. The company was expecting a loss per share of between 310.49 cents and 314.49 cents. Blue Label said earlier in August that it was in the process of determining the value of its investment in Cell C, which has struggled to make consistent profits since it became South Africa's third mobile operator in 2001. JSE-listed retailer Mr. Price says it is facing a potential financial exposure of over $681,000 and $1.36 million in a probe into a relationship between two senior managers and one of its suppliers. Should this exposure materialize, the retailer added that it would enforce its contractual rights against the supplier. No details of those involved have been given. And a Japanese court on Thursday acquitted 3 former power company executives of professional negligence in the only criminal prosecution stemming from the 2011 Fukushima nuclear meltdown. The 3 men were senior officials at the TEPCO firm operating the Fukushima Daiichi plant and faced up to 5 years in prison if convicted. The decision is likely to be appealed, extending the legal wrangling over responsibility for the disaster more than 8 years after the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl. And that's a look at your corporate headlines. You're watching Global Business coming up. UN projects intra-Africa trade to grow by 60% in 2020. And cereal traders in Nigeria count losses after the closure of Nigeria-Benin border.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Peninah. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
I've covered the China story for more than 30 years.
I'm amazed by what they have done here.
And over the years, I've witnessed China change. At times, in leaps and bounds, in very dramatic ways. And sometimes, in a more gradual way. Change may be glacial, but here it seems to be constantly happening. I'm Jaime Flor-Cruz. Join me as I revisit and rediscover an ever-changing China.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Renaissance Capital is hosting the 5th Annual Investment Conference in Nairobi. Conversations at the conference, which attract local investors, banks and international companies with interests in the region, focused on currency, GDP, expansion, inflation and the investment climate in East Africa. Charles Robertson is Renaissance Capital's Global Chief Economist and joins us here in studio for more on this. So thank you very much, Charles, for joining us. All right, so we've heard from your report, Zambia and Angola's GDP are on an upward trend. Elaborate on this, given the proceeds from crude and copper are on the decline.
Well, that's part of the advantage for them, is that their populations are quite small. If you compare them to Nigeria, which has 200 million people, 2 million barrels of oil, actually Angola's better off because it's got a smaller population. And Zambia does quite well with its high copper exports with quite a small population. So minerals help when countries have small populations.
Okay, and then you talked about FDI flows following countries that have electricity and high literacy levels, and you look at electricity, for instance, in the continent. It's a big problem. Here in Kenya, we still have a sizable portion of the country that is still not connected. Zimbabwe is in trouble, ESCOM is in trouble in South Africa. Yes. And so the question is, how does this affect FDI flows in the continent?
What we see is that when you've got enough electricity and enough education, you can have industrialization. China did it in the 1990s. India's doing it since 2015. Southern Africa, South Africa, Mauritius, Zimbabwe did it in the 1980s. North Africa can do it right now. And if education now is good enough across most of Africa for the whole continent to do better, but electricity is the big shortfall. This is where more investment and more power is needed.
Okay, and what about literacy? When you talk about literacy, are you certain the skills available in the continent can actually match up the market needs?
It's what the data is showing us is that you can industrialize as long as you have basic literacy in any major language, including local languages. You just have to be able to read and write a little, and you can do more than a subsistence farmer, someone who's just pulling the crops out of the field. Once you have some literacy, you can start working in an office, in a factory, and it's enough to get countries growing fast.
Okay. He's got a plane to catch, I have to say that. So just one final question before we let you go. You talked about Kenya. It got less FDI per capita than other African countries you were following closely. What are the factors that led to this decline?
It's been low for a few years. It may be the data, but where FDI is much higher, which is South Africa, for example, or Ghana, they have much higher levels of electricity. They have education as good as Kenya, but they have much more electricity, and that, I think, is holding the country back.
Okay, so hopefully next time we'll have more time to have this conversation. Have a very safe travel back. Thank you very much for joining us. We had in studio Charles Robertson of the Renaissance Capital. He's a global chief economist. Now, the African Union is working towards creating the largest continental free trade area among a population of 1.2 billion people. It is estimated that implementing the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement will boost intra-African trade by around 60% by 2022. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
In July this year, Africans agreed to trade together as one market, but they still have to agree on how to create a system to allow a product or service to be traded duty-free across the region. Negotiations are ongoing. Economic experts say each country should position its exports to make the most of the continental free trade area.
So if Kenya can provide and produce energy at much cheaper prices, then it should sell to the sub-region. If DRC can produce energy at much cheaper prices, it should produce and sell to the sub-region. And somebody else will do the roads because they know how to do it better. And so it's essentially leveraging our collective expertise and allowing those who need to develop different pockets of their economies to do that. And that is, I think, the benefit of the CFTA.
Statistics show that more than 40% of African companies say lack of access to information affects business environment across the continent. The UN says this can best be solved by countries compiling information into what it calls a country business index.
The African Continental Free Trade Area Country Business Index asks the private sector exactly that. How are you finding this trade area? What's constraining you from using it, or how, in what ways are you able to use it? And then once we've gathered this information, we can feed that back to policymakers, so they will know far better what they need to tweak, where they need to make changes.
The project has already been rolled out to Zambia and Cameroon for testing. In 6 to 9 months, it will be in all the countries in the continent alongside the new trade arrangements.
It has to go concurrently. So the index is to review the effectiveness of the agreement. So the agreement is in place, and then the idea of this is to look at it and to see what's working and what's not. And then to feed that back into the process so things can be tweaked and refined.
For small-scale traders, free movement across borders will be a huge boost. This remains a challenge at the moment. Some countries still require African citizens to apply for visa before entry. Some have begun relaxing their immigration laws. For instance, Kenya, Mauritius, Rwanda and Seychelles have opened up their borders to African nations without visa. Others like Ethiopia are offering visa on arrival. The journey towards 90% tariff liberalization within the continent has begun, and the African Union has set a deadline of July 2020 to take off into a tariff-free future. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Nigeria has a new economic advisory team made up of technocrats. The previous team was recently dissolved by President Muhammadu Buhari. It's expected that the new team would help take Nigeria's dwindling economy on a path of growth. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has sent this review.
A fresh start for the Muhammadu Buhari-led administration months after being sworn in for a second term. With the Federal Executive Council constituted, the government is now set to put the country on a continuous growth path. Nigeria suffered a major setback in August of 2016 when its economy fell into recession. The new government and its economic management team, headed by the Vice President, spent its first 2 years trying to get the country out of the brinks. Policies initiated under the government's Economic Recovery and Growth Plan helped them tackle some of the challenges facing the economy, although minimally.
I think they had a very slow start and quite late start, because as you know, it took quite a while till November before the ministers were put in place. And it even took much longer to get the economic team up and running. But whether they would have made a big difference in the recession that we entered is a matter of debate. But I think on balance, they've done what they could do.
Now, President Buhari has constituted a new Economic Advisory Council made up of experts with track record in macroeconomy, banking, investments, fiscal and monetary policies, and expectations from them are very high.
This is a team that some of them have actually been in government. And we have erudite people there. You have Bismarck Rwani, people that are known in the investment industry and in the fiscal policy space. So we know that they are going to confront the challenges facing the economy in a professional and dispassionate manner. And they will hope that they will come up with recommendations that will stack up and that the government would consider their recommendations.
The 8-member Economic Advisory Council will advise the President on all economic policy matters internally and globally. Nigeria's economy is expected to gain traction this year and next year as recovery continues, with GDP projected at 2.3 and 2.6% in 2019 and 2020 respectively. But the snag could be disruptions to oil productions and downward review of oil prices. These are some of the issues the new team would be working to address, as well as ensuring government's diversification plans come to light. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Still in Nigeria, the government recently shut down the Nigeria-Benin border temporarily in a push to boost local rice production and counter smuggling. However, the move has subjected most of the sellers to unforeseen losses due to the high costs of operation. CGTN's Wilkis Tanyabwa has the details.
Nigeria recently closed its border with Benin temporarily in a bid to boost food security. For the smugglers, it is now riskier to sneak through a few packets of basmati rice just to satisfy hunger for imported rice. This means the days of heaping 50-kilo sacks of rice across the saddle of motorbikes and slipping a few notes to a customs officer are now over.
Few of the items we sell are produced in Nigeria. Some items like macaronis, granite oil, even sugar. We used to get them from the Republic of Benin. But now that the border is closed, we can't go there anymore. All the items we sell now are the items we got before the closing of the border.
The number of sacks of rice smuggled across the border has also significantly reduced. As a result, the prices have skyrocketed, affecting those who are a part of the country's $50 minimum wage bracket.
A bag of rice for 50 kg of rice, before it was between 9,000 and 8,000 naira, but now it costs from 17 to 20,000 naira.
In August, President Muhammadu Buhari ordered the closure of the border to push for his plan to end Nigeria's dependence on oil revenues. Despite cheap goods hampering domestic producers, many are terming the move an extreme-level protectionist policy.
Since government has not made provision before you can embark on a policy, there should be a provision so that people will not be suffering. We are not against the closure of the border, but government must provide solution. Our people are suffering. The suffering is getting out of hand.
The government has previously encouraged development through the same strategy, which brought about some success. However, despite local production of rice rising by 60%, the output is still not enough for the 190 million Nigerians who spend about a tenth of their food budget on the staple.
According to our president, said if we stop the smuggling, the economy of this nation will get better. But with that, we near border, we're not feeling fine. We are not feeling fine for now. because for this area now, they are selling rice like 10,000, 11,000. But for we to carry it from here, reach our house, my house is not even meet 1 kilometer to this place. I cannot carry rice to my ordinary rice that I eat. The soldiers will collect it.
The Badagry market, usually teeming with activity, now lacks its usual buzz. Not only is there almost no rice, macaroni, cooking oil or sugar are also not available. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
Africa's tech talent developer Andela is set to cut 400 jobs, among them 170 in Kenya and an estimated 250 from the Nigerian and Ugandan hubs. The company has attributed the massive layoffs and restructuring to shifting market demands for more senior engineering talent. However, the startup released its first-time earnings figures, indicating it will surpass $50 million in annual revenues for 2019. Andela's business model involves training local entry-level developers to be globally competitive to enable them to outsource their skills to clients. Departing software engineers are expected to gain severance packages and placement assistance by working with partners such as CC Hub and iHub to connect the developers to new opportunities. Madagascar has launched the first edition of a tourism and transport forum called WAVE. It's in a bid to boost its appeal as a choice destination for investment. CGTN's Uche Okoronko sat down with Madagascar's Minister of Tourism to find out how exactly the country plans to achieve growth in its tourism sector. Here are some excerpts of that interview.
Now, you're looking to double the amount of tourists coming into the country to about 400,000. Give us a sense of how you plan to achieve this.
Nous avons 5 axes stratégiques.
We have 5 defined strategic points. The first one is to increase our capacity, so increase the rooms available to tourists. The second point is to diversify the options presented to tourists. That is to say, Madagascar is well known for its nature, its culture, its welcoming nature, and its hospitality. Now we want Madagascar to be known for things like its palm trees, luxury, things like ecotourism, things like maize, event-based tourism, sports-centered tourism like golf and kite surfing, even river-based tourism activities, because we have rivers and we can exploit them and develop them. These are things we are not too well known for, so we have to change our communication and marketing strategy to gain value for these new tourism-based products. The third point is to improve the accessibility to our tourism sites, accessibility on a national level, so in the interior of the country. We also have a strategy to improve accessibility on an international and regional level. We also want to improve our national tourism. Madagascar has around 25 million inhabitants, so we should encourage our citizens to travel and be tourists. So we also have to develop national tourism.
Now, how much tourism-related investment has the government made so far? How much do you plan to allocate in your budget, especially for the tourist sector going forward?
Aujourd'hui, il y a 2 stratégies.
Currently, we have 2 strategies. The first thing is to improve infrastructure. That's why we have organized this forum, to present the potential of our tourism sector so investors will come to invest in Madagascar. So that's an aspect of development which will be taken up by the private sector. We will just be here to facilitate the implementation with future investors. And then there is the promotional aspect. We want to multiple the current promotional budget by 10.
You're watching Global Business. Still ahead. Trade talks between China and the US set to resume in Washington. And Huawei unveils new products and cloud services.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. See, business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Let's have a look at the stories making headlines today. Former Tunisian President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali has died in Saudi Arabia. His death comes a few days after Tunisia held its second ever free presidential elections. The 83-year-old former leader had been living in exile in Saudi Arabia. In 2011 protests in Tunisia, he was ousted from power. The protests not only ended his 23-year rule, but also sparked the Arab Spring. Every 11 seconds, a pregnant woman or a newborn dies somewhere in the world. This is according to new child and maternal mortality estimates released by the United Nations. Despite the grim figure, the report highlighted that since 2000, maternal deaths have reduced by over 1/3. Patients in Zimbabwe are being turned away from public hospitals in Harare due to a doctor's strike. Doctors have gone on strike over salaries and the missing union leader. Government has deployed army doctors to mitigate the crisis. And China has sent more peacekeepers to serve in the United Nations mission in South Sudan. The 163 additional Chinese troops arrived in South Sudan's capital on Thursday. China is now among the biggest contributors of peacekeepers to UNMISS with more than 1,000 troops. And that's a look at some of the day's top stories. Trade talks are back on between China and the US. This latest round, the first in nearly 2 months, is set to begin Thursday in Washington between deputy trade negotiators. It should pave the way for higher-level talks in October to resolve this bitter 14-month trade war. Vice Finance Minister Liao Min is leading the Chinese delegation of about 30 officials. Deputy U.S. Trade Representative Jeffrey Garish is at the head of Washington's team. The discussions are likely to focus heavily on agriculture while also covering intellectual property protections. A case of what one might call unintended consequences. Women shoppers in the U.S. are likely to be more hurt by Washington's latest increase in tariffs. CGTN's Peninah Karibe in New York explains how this situation has come about.
Until recently, U.S. consumers were largely shielded from a direct hit in the U.S.-China trade war. But as of September 1st, clothing and shoes, among other items, face an additional 15% tariff when imported from China. Prices for those goods could rise, and female shoppers will likely feel the pain the most. That's because women tend to consume more clothing than men, and more of what they buy is made in China. According to an analysis by the Wall Street Journal, in 2018, 42% of girls' and women's shoes and clothing was imported from China. For men and boys, it was only 26%. Fashion experts say China's manufacturing infrastructure and know-how makes it an ideal place to make women's apparel that needs to be delivered quickly and is often more detailed than men's.
You would go to, for example, Pakistan or Mexico to make a very simple pair of men's jeans or t-shirt. If you want to make something more elaborate with more make in it, and a women's garment, you would probably go to China.
JCPenney said in a U.S. filing that 13 out of the 19 items in its stores the most impacted by tariffs are for women and girls. It warned that tariffs would have a significant impact on its customers. Female consumers in New York had mixed reactions to the prospect of price hikes due to the tariffs.
I really don't mind, even though I wouldn't like to pay more, but it's understandable when it's something like that.
Basically, if people start shopping in the closet more often, then the prices should not affect us as much as we think it will.
I will still buy it. The prices went up. Yeah, because they're not going to be cheaper anywhere else, so you're going to have to buy something. Everybody loves to shop.
Dufty says some consumers may be able to shrug off higher prices, but others won't.
That 15% is significant. It's going to take the price point of a pair of jeans at Target, let's say they're $29.95. It's going to take them over the tipping point of being over the $30 mark, which can be, really have a resounding effect on a consumer. They can see that as, that's beyond my pocketbook right now.
Dufty said that could cause a slowdown in sales at larger U.S. retailers with ripple effects on the broader economy. Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Huawei unveils new products and cloud services on day 2 of its annual flagship event in Shanghai. These latest products ran mostly on Ascend processors and are already making remarkable differences in people's lives. CGTN reporter Li Nan brings us more.
Household garbage has been on the minds of Shanghai residents since a mandatory sorting scheme took effect this July. Are the contents of their bins wet, dry, hazardous or recyclable? It has taken people a while to figure it all out. Well, now a robot has come to their rescue.
We implant the algorithm of garbage sorting in Huawei's processor. The chip can analyze the visual information, and the robot recognizes moving items in real time. And it will also upload the data to the cloud to improve the model simultaneously.
Elsewhere, exploring vision functions in children at young ages was very difficult, and now doctors can use smartphones and other devices to test patients' visual development.
We present on the screen several carefully designed stimuli that test several aspects of the visual function, and we use eye tracking technology to track the gaze of the patient while he's looking at those stimuli on the screen. And so that way we can extract very precise metrics that are a very good indicator for the doctor.
The improving computing power of Huawei processors is behind this technology, which was once impossible. They are considered major breakthroughs from scientific research to business. Huawei hopes more developers and partners from big companies to startups will join its ecosystem and deploy its computing power across different industries to change the way we live and work. Huawei has launched cloud services and hardware boards to accelerate customer innovation. Guided by Huawei's Kunpeng board and reference design, partners can develop servers and desktop products rapidly.
Our dream is to invest in all scenario processors, support our partners to build an open ecosystem, have the most powerful computing capacity in the world, and become the echo driver of the AI world.
Huawei has supported 1.3 million developers and will invest $1.5 billion in the next 5 years to expand the program to another 5 million developers. Li Nan, CGTN, Shanghai.
The European Commission says the UK government has submitted some written proposals on the amendment of the stalled Brexit deal. The two sides are expected to return to negotiations in Brussels on Friday. This comes after European Parliament lawmakers voted in favour of another Brexit delay beyond October 31st, should the UK request it. Meanwhile, London says it would table Brexit solutions. However, it quotes not according to an artificial deadline. This was in response to a statement from the Finnish Prime Minister's office saying the UK government must provide written proposals this month. Amazon will raise fees for its French marketplace partners by 3% starting October 1st. The move is in response to the digital tax France has slapped on the company, along with other tech giants like Google, Apple and Facebook. For a country where about 1 in every 5 items is sold online, the move is raising alarms among small and medium companies. CGTN's Stéphane Duvries has more from Paris.
Romain Boyer runs a small independent bookstore just north of Paris. He has a wide collection of school books, literature and books on Japan. Amazon's decision will have direct consequences for his business because the marketplace is a vital part of his turnover.
On va dire une trentaine de % sur le chiffre annuel.
Let's say 30% of the yearly turnover. That means around 10 books a day. This is not good news. It's a new tax that we cannot recoup. We are losing 3%. You can say, well, that's not huge. But actually, for a bookstore, it's quite a lot.
Amazon claims it has no other option than to charge its clients this new tax. Consumer groups in France aren't buying that.
Amazon's argument is that we don't have enough money. We really have to charge the sellers. This is not really convincing the consumers. It is, after all, a very profitable company.
Amazon's step is not yet being followed by its competitors, like Rakuten, the third largest e-commerce platform in France.
We made the decision that for Rakuten merchants, clients, we will not pass on the tax, the 3% tax in 2019, since we are waiting for first more clarification from the French government on how to enforce this new tax first, and second, we don't want to penalize our merchants during the shopping season, which is for them the crucial moment of the year.
Yet this client-friendly gesture comes at a steep price for Rakuten.
For the French market, we reckon it would be around several millions of euro, so additional tax, right? And we think that it will have a negative impact again, since companies like us will ultimately be forced to reduce their investments in building new businesses and growing the French economy.
In the meantime, Romain Boyer will keep using Amazon to sell dozens of books each month to his clients, but he doesn't know for how long.
Il y aura un impact, c'est certain. Maintenant,
there will be an impact, that's for sure, but how much, we don't know yet. We will have to recoup somewhere else. Maybe proposing fewer titles, or not buying a new computer, or organizing fewer signing sessions. We will have to find ways to earn it back, but I don't have a solution yet.
Because Amazon is so dominant in the French market, he doesn't have many options anyway.
Ah oui, actuellement, on ne peut plus s'en passer.
Today, you can't do business without them, that's for sure. 30% of my business. Without that, I would have to close shop.
Stéphane Duvries, CGTN, Paris.
All right, let's look at the commodities market. Oil prices rose sharply today, supported by supply risks brought about by last weekend's drone attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure and a cut in U.S. interest rates. Gold rose back above $1,500 an ounce as the focus returned to global growth risks and Middle East tensions, helping bullion recover after the U.S. Federal Reserve cut interest rates but gave mixed signals on any future easing. You're watching Global Business, still ahead. A new vegan dessert causes frenzy among conscious youth in South Africa.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Continental, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Veganism seems to be gaining momentum among young people in South Africa. It's no longer just about being health conscious, but about becoming animal and environmentally conscious too. But going vegan is not easy. It's a difficult lifestyle choice. Vegans don't consume anything that derives from an animal.
Becoming a vegan was easy for Sinenhlanhla and Ndlela. Living without ice cream wasn't.
I started eliminating all animal products from my diet, and I love ice cream. So there was no way that I couldn't have ice cream. And the ice creams that were at the market at the time I didn't like. So I decided to make my own that's gonna somehow encompass everything that I want to bring out to the world and serve love through scoops. That's how Coco came.
Ndlela's love for ice cream led her to research, learn and experiment with making her own scoops.
I didn't have any business acumen to begin with. Yes, at home there have been people who started businesses, but I've never looked at them from a business angle. I've always looked at it's just a chore for me to go and help out or whatever. So I've never really been interested in business. I missed a chance to learn more. But now I'm getting into other challenges where it's financial. Because to grow your business, you obviously need capital. But then you can't just choose whoever to come into your business.
Some would call it an obsession. Ndlela left a career in the television industry to open YoCoco. Challenges aside, she believes it was the best move.
Honestly, I didn't even think there was a gap in the market. I just happened to be at the right place, wanting the right thing at the right time.
I got chocolate flavored ice cream. The ice cream was very nice. I think I'm gonna bite again.
We use nut-based milks, and then we use a vegan sweetener, which is agave. We're also working on a sugar-free range. We also work with a few farms for our ingredients. So currently I supply at Jackson's, both in Kyalami and Bryanston. I supply Craig Hall Spa, supply the Fussy Vegan in Blegauri, Cape Town Sea Point Spa. We're going to supply Balito. Eventually we're going to have our own pop-up, but then I also want to keep the model of supplying to other retailers.
Sometimes being at the right place at the right time is all you need to birth something great. YoCoco has grown from orders on Instagram and other social media and now supplies selective stores around South Africa. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And finally, a look at the currencies. South Africa's rand was slightly weaker today after the central bank left its main interest rate on hold as expected. The Kenyan shilling was stable against the dollar, with inflows from offshore investors buying government debt, helping soak up pressure from excess liquidity in the local money market. And with that, we come to the end of Global Business tonight. Do send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platform. I'm Peninah Karibe. Thank you for watching.